The bitter winter wind howled across the desolate Nebraska plains as Olivia Norton clutched her wailing infant son tighter to her chest, desperately trying to shield him from the relentless cold. Her threadbare coat provided little protection against the biting December chill of 1876, and the abandoned stagecoach station offered scant shelter as the blizzard intensified. Tears froze against her cheeks as she rocked 4-month-old Thomas, his cries growing weaker with each passing hour. "Hush now, my sweet boy," Olivia whispered, her voice breaking. "Someone will come, someone must come." But her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The nearest town was 15 miles away, and her husband James had left 3 months ago, promising to return with supplies and news of gold. Neither he nor his promises had materialized. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pierced through the howling wind. Olivia's heart leapt with both hope and fear. In these untamed territories, a stranger could mean salvation or doom. She pressed herself against the weathered wall of the station, cradling Thomas closer as his cries continued. The door burst open, letting in a swirl of snow and a tall figure wrapped in a heavy buffalo coat. The man stomped his boots and brushed snow from his hat before his eyes found Olivia huddled in the corner with her crying child. "Madam," he said, his deep voice resonating in the small space. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, though he couldn't have been more than 30 years old. "Preston Dawson. I was trailing my cattle when the storm hit. Didn't expect to find anyone out here." Olivia didn't respond, her wary eyes fixed on the stranger as Thomas continued to whimper. The cowboy's expression softened as he glanced at the baby. "Your little one sounds mighty cold." He moved closer slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "I've got supplies on my horse." "Food, blankets." "We're fine," Olivia said, though her trembling voice betrayed her. Thomas's cries grew more insistent, his tiny body shivering despite her efforts. Preston knelt down a few feet away. "Madam, I don't mean to frighten you, but that child needs warmth and fast. This cold can kill a grown man, let alone a baby." He unbuttoned his coat slightly, revealing a wool-lined vest beneath. "Give him here, I'll keep him warm while you rest. I swear on my mother's grave I mean no harm." Olivia hesitated, studying his face. His eyes were kind, deep brown with flecks of gold that caught the dim light. There was something trustworthy in his gaze, something that reminded her of her late father. "Please," Preston added softly. "I have a little sister back home with children of her own. I know how to hold a baby." Thomas's cries had weakened to pitiful whimpers, his lips taking on a bluish tinge that terrified Olivia. With trembling hands, she slowly extended her arms, passing her precious child to the cowboy. "His name is Thomas," she whispered. Preston nodded, gently taking the infant and tucking him inside his coat against the warmth of his chest. "Hello there, Thomas," he said, his voice impossibly gentle for such a rugged man. "You're going to be just fine now." Almost immediately, the baby's cries began to soften. Preston stood carefully, keeping one hand supporting Thomas inside his coat. "I'm going to fetch my saddlebags. Got some jerky, coffee, and blankets. We'll have you both warm soon enough." He looked down at Olivia with concern. "What's your name, madam?" "Olivia Norton." "Well, Mrs. Norton, if you'll permit me, I aim to see you and your boy through this storm." Olivia nodded, too exhausted and cold to maintain her suspicion. As Preston stepped outside to retrieve his supplies, she closed her eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer of thanks for this unexpected salvation. When Preston returned, his arms loaded with supplies, Thomas had stopped crying and had fallen into a peaceful sleep against the cowboy's chest. The simple sight of her son, safe and warm, brought fresh tears to Olivia's eyes, tears of relief this time. "I've got a small herd penned in a draw about a mile back," Preston explained as he unrolled a thick wool blanket and handed it to her. "My trail hand is watching them. We were heading to the railroad at Grand Island when this storm blew in." He pulled out a tin pot. "Let me get a fire going in that stove. Some hot coffee will do you good." As Preston busied himself with building a fire in the pot-bellied stove that stood in the corner, Olivia wrapped herself in the blanket, watching him move efficiently with her child still tucked safely against his body. His hands were large and calloused, but handled the kindling with surprising gentleness. "What brings you out here alone, Mrs. Norton?" Preston asked as the fire caught and began to warm the small space. Olivia stared into the growing flames. "My husband James and I were heading west to Oregon. We were traveling with a small wagon train, but our wagon broke down about 20 miles back. James went to find help 3 days ago. He never returned." Preston's eyes met hers, filled with understanding rather than pity. "The territory is unforgiving, madam. I'm sorry. The others couldn't wait. They left us supplies, but..." She looked down at her hands. "The wolves came last night, took what food we had left. I started walking this morning, hoping to find a town, but the storm came so suddenly." The cowboy nodded, measuring coffee grounds into the pot. "That's Cottonwood Falls, about 15 miles east, proper little town with a doctor and everything." He glanced down at Thomas, who was sleeping soundly. "Your boy seems healthy despite the cold." "He is strong, like his father." Olivia's voice caught on the words. Preston placed the pot on the stove and carefully sat down on an overturned crate, adjusting the baby inside his coat. "When the storm breaks, I can take you both to Cottonwood Falls. My sister Martha lives there with her husband. They'd be happy to give you shelter until you decide what to do next." "Why would you help us?" Olivia asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Preston's expression remained steady. "Because it's what anyone would do, madam." "No," she said softly. "It's not. The world isn't that kind." "Maybe not the whole world," he conceded. "But out here we look after each other. It's the only way to survive." He checked on Thomas, who had wrapped a tiny hand around one of Preston's fingers. "Besides, I can't leave a mother and child alone in this wilderness. My own ma would rise from her grave and haunt me something fierce." For the first time in days, perhaps even weeks, Olivia felt a smile tug at her lips. "How long have you been a cowboy, Mr. Dawson?" "Preston, please." He poured the now boiling coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to her. "Since I was 14. Started as a trail cook's helper on a drive up from Texas. Been moving cattle ever since." He took a sip of his coffee. "These are my own stock now, saved up for 5 years to buy them, aiming to start a proper ranch someday." They talked as the storm continued to howl outside, the abandoned station gradually warming from the stove's heat. Preston shared stories of cattle drives and the characters he'd met on the trail. Olivia found herself laughing at his tale of a preacher who joined a drive and tried to baptize the cowboys in a mud hole during a thunderstorm. As night fell completely, Preston insisted Olivia take the only cot in the corner while he made a bedroll near the stove. Thomas still nestled against his chest. "He seems quite taken with you," Olivia observed as she settled under the blankets, watching her son sleep peacefully in the cowboy's arms. "Children and horses," Preston replied with a small smile. "They're the best judges of character." Olivia awoke just before dawn to find Preston already up, heating water on the stove with one hand while still holding Thomas with the other. The baby was awake and content, making soft cooing sounds as Preston spoke to him in low, gentle tones. "Good morning, Mrs. Norton," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Storms let up some. We should be able to head out in a few hours if it keeps clearing." Olivia sat up, running a hand through her tangled auburn hair. "Thank you for caring for him. I haven't slept that well in months." Preston smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "He's a good boy, hardly fussed at all." He carefully passed Thomas back to her. "I made some porridge from my supplies, nothing fancy, but it's hot." As Olivia fed and changed Thomas, Preston stepped outside to check on the weather and his horse. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on her. This stranger had transformed their desperate situation into something almost normal, comfortable even. By mid-morning, the storm had cleared enough for travel. Preston helped Olivia onto his horse, then handed Thomas up to her before mounting behind them. The closeness was intimate yet respectful, his arms encircling her only as much as necessary to hold the reins. "My trail hand Joe will drive the cattle on to Grand Island," Preston explained as they set out. "I sent him word with my plans. He's been with me long enough to handle it." The journey to Cottonwood Falls took most of the day, with Preston leading the horse carefully through the snow-covered plains. They stopped twice to rest and feed Thomas, and Olivia couldn't help but notice how naturally Preston interacted with her son, talking to him as if he understood every word. "Have you ever been married, Mr. Dawson?" she asked during one of their stops. Preston shook his head, his eyes on the horizon. "No, madam, the trail doesn't lend itself to family life, always moving, following the seasons and the cattle." He glanced at her. "Been thinking lately it might be time to settle, though." As the sun began its descent, the small town of Cottonwood Falls appeared in the distance. Even from afar, Olivia could see it was larger and more established than she had expected, with proper wooden buildings rather than tents and lean toss. "My sister's place is on the edge of town," Preston said as they approached. "Her husband runs the livery stable. Good man, Edward Miller." Martha Miller proved to be as kind as her brother. A plump, cheerful woman with Preston's same warm brown eyes, she welcomed Olivia and Thomas without hesitation, ushering them into her comfortable home and immediately fussing over the baby. "You poor dears," she clucked, taking Thomas from Olivia's arms and bouncing him gently. "Caught in that terrible storm. Preston, you get her things settled in the spare room while I heat up some stew." Olivia looked around in bewilderment. "My things? I don't have any, we'll fix that," Martha assured her. "I have some dresses that can be taken in, and there are baby things left from my William. He's 3 now and won't miss them." That night, after a hearty meal and a proper hot bath, Olivia lay in a real bed for the first time in months, her son sleeping peacefully in a borrowed cradle beside her. The events of the past 2 days felt like a dream: the desperate cold, the stranger's kindness, this unexpected sanctuary. As exhaustion pulled her toward sleep, she found herself thinking of Preston's gentle hands and the way he'd spoken so softly to Thomas. The next morning, she found Preston in the kitchen with Martha, discussing his cattle business over coffee. "I should only be gone 3 weeks, he was saying. "Joe will handle things at Grand Island, but I need to be there for the sale." Martha noticed Olivia in the doorway. "Good morning, dear. Come have some breakfast. Preston was just telling me he needs to finish taking his cattle to market." Olivia felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "You're leaving?" Preston stood as she entered, a gesture of respect that seemed both old-fashioned and entirely in character. "I have responsibilities to my men and my business." His expression was apologetic, "but Martha and Edward are happy to have you stay as long as you need." "Of course," Martha added warmly. "It's wonderful having a little one in the house again. My boys are too big to cuddle now." She gestured to the yard where 2 young boys were chopping kindling under their father's supervision. Olivia sat down at the table, suddenly uncertain. In just 1 day, Preston Dawson had become her lifeline, her protector. The thought of him leaving made her feel adrift again. "Will you come back to Cottonwood Falls?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Preston's eyes met hers across the table. "I had planned to. My cattle will winter at a ranch outside of town." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to check on you and Thomas when I return, if that would be acceptable." "Yes," Olivia said, perhaps too quickly. "That would be fine." Later that morning, as Preston prepared to leave, Olivia brought Thomas outside to say goodbye. The baby had grown noticeably attached to Preston in their short time together, reaching out his tiny hands toward the cowboy. "May I?" Preston asked, holding out his arms. Olivia nodded, passing Thomas to him. Preston held the boy with practiced ease, speaking to him in that same gentle tone he'd used in the stage-coach station. "You be good for your mama, little man. I'll be back before you know it." He looked at Olivia. "Mrs. Norton, he paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "Take care of yourself. Martha will help with anything you need." As he mounted his horse, Thomas began to cry, as if sensing the departure of the man who had saved them. Olivia bounced him gently, watching as Preston rode away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the distance. "He'll be back," Martha said, coming to stand beside her. "My brother is a man of his word." Over the next 3 weeks, Olivia gradually settled into life in Cottonwood Falls. Martha and Edward were generous hosts, insisting she think of their home as her own. The town itself was welcoming, if curious about the young widow and her baby. Olivia maintained the story that her husband had died on the trail west, finding it easier than explaining James's abandonment. She helped Martha with household chores and caring for her sons, William and George. The routine was comforting after months of uncertainty on the trail. In the evenings, she often sat on the porch with Thomas, looking eastward, wondering where Preston was and if he thought of them. "You like him," Martha observed one such evening, joining Olivia with a cup of tea. "He saved our lives," Olivia replied, avoiding the real question. Martha smiled knowingly. "Preston has always been the rescuer. Even as a boy, he was bringing home injured animals, standing up for smaller children." She sipped her tea. "But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you and Thomas." Olivia felt her cheeks warm. "We've only just met, and I'm still—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. Was she still a wife, a widow? Neither felt quite true. "Time has a different meaning out here," Martha said gently. "Life is harder, shorter sometimes. We learn to recognize what matters quickly." She patted Olivia's hand. "Just something to consider." The following week, Edward came home from the livery with news that a rider had come through town reporting a man matching James's description working at a mining camp 50 miles west. Olivia received the news with complicated emotions: relief that he might be alive, anger that he hadn't returned for her and Thomas, and a confusing reluctance to disrupt the new life she was building. "Do you want to send a message to him?" Edward asked kindly. Olivia considered the question carefully. "No," she finally said. "If James wanted to find us, he would have. He chose to leave us behind." Her decision felt both liberating and final. That night, as she nursed Thomas before bed, she realized she was no longer the same woman who had followed her husband west with blind faith. The wilderness had changed her, hardened her in some ways, and opened her eyes in others. Preston returned to Cottonwood Falls on a crisp October morning, riding into town with the same quiet confidence he'd shown in the stage-coach station. Olivia was hanging laundry in Martha's yard when she heard the hoofbeats. Thomas, now 5 months old and sitting on a blanket nearby, seemed to recognize the sound too, his head turning toward the approaching rider. "Mrs. Norton," Preston called, dismounting and removing his hat. He looked much the same, perhaps a bit more tanned from his time on the trail. His eyes immediately went to Thomas. "And young Mr. Norton, you've grown, little man." Thomas responded with delighted babbling, reaching toward Preston with chubby hands. Without thinking, Olivia picked up her son and walked toward the cowboy, a smile spreading across her face. "We weren't sure when to expect you," she said, suddenly conscious of her work dress and hair escaping its pins. Preston's eyes were warm as they met hers. "The cattle sale went well. I've secured grazing rights on land just outside town for the winter." He hesitated, then asked, "How have you been faring?" "Well," Olivia replied, "very well. Your sister and Edward have been incredibly kind." Preston nodded, his expression pleased. "Martha mentioned in her letters that you've become quite indispensable to her household. She writes to you." Olivia asked, surprised. "Every week," Preston confirmed with a small smile. "She's been keeping me informed of everything." The way he said everything made Olivia wonder exactly what Martha had shared. Before she could respond, Thomas lunged from her arms toward Preston with surprising strength, nearly toppling out of her grasp. Preston stepped forward quickly, his hands coming up to steady the baby. "Whoa there, young man," he laughed, his hands brushing against Olivia's as he helped secure Thomas. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Olivia's body. For a moment they stood close, Thomas between them, the three of them forming a picture that might have appeared to an outside observer like a family. Martha's voice broke the moment. "Preston, you're back," she bustled out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Just in time for dinner." Edward's bringing home a roast from the butcher. That evening, the Miller home was filled with conversation and laughter as Preston regaled them with tales from his cattle drive. Olivia found herself watching him interact with his nephews, patient and attentive as they peppered him with questions about cowboys and Indians. "Uncle Preston, did you fight any outlaws?" 7-year-old George asked eagerly. "No, thankfully," Preston replied. "Cattle driving is exciting enough without gunfights." But you carry a gun, the boy persisted. Preston's expression grew serious. I do, to protect my herd and my men, but a gun is a tool, George, not a toy. The stories you hear about the West are mostly tall tales. Real cowboys spend more time mending fences than drawing pistols. Olivia appreciated his honest answer, the way he didn't glorify violence for the boy's entertainment. It spoke to a thoughtfulness she found increasingly attractive. After dinner, when the children were in bed, Preston asked Olivia if she would join him for a walk. The October air was crisp but pleasant as they strolled through Cottonwood Falls, Thomas bundled in Olivia's arms. Martha tells me you've been helping at the school some days, Preston said as they passed the small schoolhouse. Olivia nodded. The teacher, Miss Reynolds, needed assistance with the younger children. I was a teacher back in Pennsylvania before I married James. Do you miss it, teaching? Very much, Olivia admitted. I loved seeing children learn, watching them discover something new about the world. Preston was quiet for a moment, then said, Miss Reynolds is leaving after Christmas, getting married and moving to Omaha. The town council will be looking for a replacement. Olivia stopped walking, turning to face him. Are you suggesting I apply? I'm suggesting you consider it, he replied carefully, if you're planning to stay in Cottonwood Falls. The question beneath his words was clear. Olivia looked down at Thomas, then back at Preston. I have nowhere else to go, she said softly, and nowhere else I'd rather be if I'm honest. Relief flickered across Preston's face. I'm glad to hear it. He hesitated, then added, I've purchased land about 3 miles outside town, good grazing land with a creek running through it. I'm building a proper ranch house come spring. That sounds wonderful, Olivia said, unsure why he was telling her this. Preston looked away toward the darkening horizon. A house needs a family to make it a home. He turned back to her, his expression earnest. Mrs. Norton, Olivia, I know we've known each other only briefly, but I find myself thinking of you and Thomas constantly. I understand if it's too soon, if your heart is still with your husband, but I wanted you to know that James abandoned us, Olivia interrupted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. He's alive, working at a mining camp west of here. Preston's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. You're certain? There have been reliable reports. I've chosen not to contact him. She lifted her chin slightly. He made his choice when he didn't return for us. Preston was silent for a long moment. Then he said, that changes things legally. You're not a widow. No, Olivia agreed, her heart sinking at his practical response. I'm not. To her surprise, Preston smiled. Then I'll have to adjust my approach. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Olivia, I'm not a wealthy man, but I have prospects. I'm hardworking, honest, and I care deeply for both you and Thomas. I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it. Olivia felt a rush of emotion, relief, joy, and something deeper she wasn't quite ready to name. I would like that very much, Preston. Thomas chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, causing both adults to laugh. Preston touched the baby's cheek gently. I think he approves. The following week saw Preston calling at the Miller house almost daily. He brought small gifts, a wooden rattle carved for Thomas, wildflowers for Olivia, candy for Martha's boys. On Sundays after church, he took Olivia and Thomas for drives in his wagon, showing them the land he'd purchased and describing his plans for the ranch. The house will sit there on that rise, he explained one crisp November afternoon, pointing to a small hill overlooking the creek. Good view of the whole property and protected from the north winds. Olivia imagined a home there, a solid wooden structure with a porch and windows that caught the morning sun. It's beautiful land. 3 bedrooms to start, Preston continued, watching her face carefully, with room to expand as needed. The implication of his words sent a pleasant warmth through Olivia's body. She looked down at Thomas, who was falling asleep in her arms, then back at Preston. It sounds perfect. As winter approached, Preston spent every free moment working on his ranch. He hired local men to help build corrals and a barn before the ground froze too hard for post holes. Olivia often brought lunch to the workers, watching with admiration as Preston directed the construction with the same quiet competence he showed in everything. The town council asked me about the teaching position, Olivia told him one afternoon as they sat on a fallen log, sharing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples. Preston looked up with interest. "What did you tell them?" "That I would be honored to accept." She smiled shyly. "I start after the new year." "Congratulations," Preston said warmly. "You'll be wonderful." "There's just one concern," Olivia admitted. "Thomas, I'm not sure how to manage teaching with a baby." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "Martha would help, I'm sure, and perhaps—" He hesitated, then continued carefully, "Perhaps by then, other arrangements might be possible." Olivia's heart quickened at his meaning. Their courtship had progressed steadily, with Preston a perfect gentleman in all respects. He'd never pressed for more than she was willing to give, though his feelings were obvious to anyone who saw them together. "Preston," she began, then paused, gathering her courage. "I care for you deeply, more than I thought possible after knowing someone for such a short time." His expression softened. "I feel the same, Olivia, from that first moment in the stagecoach station when you trusted me with Thomas." He reached for her hand. "I've never been a man of many words, but I know what I feel. I love you, both of you." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes. "I love you too." Preston's kiss was gentle, almost reverent, his calloused hand cupping her cheek with surprising tenderness. When they parted, his eyes were alight with happiness. "There's a legal matter to address," he said pragmatically, though his smile remained. "Your marriage to James." Olivia nodded soberly. "I've spoken to Judge Wilson. Since James abandoned us and there's evidence he's still alive, I can petition for divorce on grounds of desertion. It will take some time, but the judge seemed sympathetic." "Then we'll wait," Preston said simply, "however long it takes." The legal proceedings moved more quickly than expected. Judge Wilson, moved by Olivia's situation and respected Preston's standing in the community, expedited the petition. By Christmas, the divorce was granted, freeing Olivia from her ties to the man who had abandoned her and their child. On Christmas Eve, the Miller home was warm with festivity. Martha had outdone herself with a feast that had the table groaning under its weight. The children were giddy with excitement, and even baby Thomas seemed to sense the special nature of the occasion. Babbling happily as he was passed from lap to lap, after dinner, as they gathered around the fire, Preston asked Olivia to step onto the porch with him for a moment. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing in the black sky above them. "I have something for you," Preston said, pulling a small package from his coat pocket. "An early Christmas gift." Olivia unwrapped the paper to find a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a simple gold ring with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," Preston explained softly. "Olivia Norton, I love you more than I thought possible. You and Thomas have brought joy into my life that I never expected to find. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Olivia's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Preston." Their wedding took place on New Year's Day, 1877, a simple ceremony in the town's small church with Martha, Edward, and their sons as witnesses. Thomas, dressed in a new outfit Martha had sewn, was held by Edward during the service, his curious eyes taking in the proceedings with apparent fascination. "I, Preston James Dawson, take thee, Olivia Grace Norton, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Preston recited, his voice steady and sure as he slid the pearl ring onto her finger. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her with a restrained passion that promised more once they were alone. The small congregation applauded, and Thomas let out a delighted squeal that made everyone laugh. That night, after celebrating with a small reception at the Miller home, Preston drove Olivia and Thomas to their temporary home, a rented cabin on the edge of his property. Construction on the main house would resume in spring, but Preston had ensured the cabin was comfortable for the winter months, with a sturdy stove, proper furniture, and even curtains Martha had sewn for the windows. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dawson," Preston said softly as he carried her over the threshold, mindful of the sleeping Thomas in her arms. Later, after they had settled Thomas in his cradle, Olivia and Preston stood by the fire, the realization of their new circumstances suddenly making them both shy. "I've never been anyone's wife," Olivia whispered. "Not truly, James and I, it wasn't like this." Preston took her hands in his, and I've never been anyone's husband. We'll learn together." His eyes were tender as he added, "We have all the time in the world, Olivia. There's no rush." But the passion that had been building between them over months of restrained courtship needed little encouragement. Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation for Olivia. Preston's tenderness and consideration showing in this aspect of marriage as in all others. As winter yielded to spring, the Dawson family settled into a rhythm. Olivia taught at the school during the day while Preston worked on the ranch house and tended his growing herd. Martha often cared for Thomas during school hours, though Preston sometimes kept the boy with him, strapping him to his chest as he worked around the property. "He'll be a cattleman before he can walk," Preston joked one evening as Thomas reached for the small wooden cow Preston had carved for him. "As long as he learns his letters too," Olivia responded with a smile, leaning against her husband's shoulder as they sat before the fire. Preston kissed the top of her head. "With a teacher for a mother, I have no doubt he'll be the most educated rancher in Nebraska territory." By summer, the ranch house was completed, a sturdy two-story structure with wide porches and ample windows. Olivia had overseen the interior furnishings, creating a home that balanced comfort with practicality. Her favorite space was the small library Preston had insisted on including, with floor-to-ceiling shelves for her books and a comfortable window seat overlooking the creek. "Every teacher needs a proper library," he'd said when showing her the plans. "And every child should grow up surrounded by books." Moving day arrived in July. As Preston carried the last of their belongings into the new house, Olivia stood in the doorway of what would be Thomas's room, watching her son pull himself up on the rail of his new bed, his legs growing stronger each day. "He'll be walking before we know it," Preston observed, coming to stand beside her, "and talking," Olivia added. "He's already trying to say mama," Preston smiled. "What about Papa? Has he tried that yet?" Olivia turned to face her husband, her expression serious. "Preston, I've been thinking about that, about what Thomas should call you." A shadow passed over Preston's face. "I wouldn't presume to replace his father, that's just it," Olivia interrupted gently. "You are his father in all the ways that matter. You've loved him, protected him, provided for him." She took Preston's hand. "I want Thomas to call you Papa because that's what you are if you want that too." Preston's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Olivia," he whispered hoarsely, "nothing would make me prouder than to be Thomas's father." That night after Thomas was asleep in his new room, Preston and Olivia sat on the porch swing watching fireflies dance over the creek. "I have news," Olivia said, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. Preston turned to look at her, his expression curious. "What is it, love?" Olivia placed his hand on her stomach. "Our family will be growing come winter." The joy that spread across Preston's face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "A baby, you're sure?" Olivia nodded, her own happiness reflected in her smile. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait until we were settled in our new home to tell you." Preston gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "Olivia Dawson," he murmured against her hair, "you have made me the happiest man in the territory." As autumn painted the plains in gold and crimson, the Dawson ranch thrived. Preston's cattle business expanded with a successful breeding program, and he hired 2 permanent hands to help with the growing operation. Olivia continued teaching, her gentle but firm approach making her beloved by students and parents alike. Thomas, now nearly a year old, was walking with increasing confidence and had indeed begun calling Preston Papa, much to the cowboy's evident delight. One evening in late October, as a cool wind signaled the approach of winter, Olivia sat in the library grading papers while Preston read to Thomas by the fire. The domestic peace of the scene struck her suddenly how far they had come from that desperate night in the abandoned stage-coach station when a stranger had offered to keep her baby warm. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Olivia smiled. "About how life can change in an instant. If you hadn't found us that night." Preston shook his head. "I don't like to think about that. It was Providence that led me to you, nothing less." "Do you remember what you said to me?" Olivia asked softly. Give him here, I'll keep him warm. I remember every moment of that night, Preston replied, his eyes holding hers across the room. How frightened you looked, how brave you were to trust a stranger with your child. Thomas, growing sleepy in Preston's lap, reached up to pat his father's cheek, a gesture of affection that made both adults smile. I think it's bedtime for this young cowboy, Preston said, standing with Thomas in his arms. Would you like to tuck him in, or shall I? Together, Olivia decided, setting aside her papers. As they settled Thomas into his bed, the boy already half asleep, Olivia felt the baby within her move for the first time, a gentle flutter that made her catch her breath. She took Preston's hand and placed it on the small swell of her stomach. Can you feel it? She whispered. Preston's eyes widened as he felt the subtle movement. Hello there, little one, he said softly, his voice filled with wonder. That December, as snow blanketed the Nebraska plains once again, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Martha Dawson. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Martha serving as midwife and Preston pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door, Thomas toddling after him in perfect imitation. When Preston was finally allowed to enter, he found Olivia propped up in bed, their newborn daughter cradled in her arms. The sight stopped him in his tracks, his eyes filling with tears of joy. She's perfect, he whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. Just like her mother, Olivia smiled tiredly. She has your eyes, I think, and your chin. Preston kissed Olivia's forehead, then gently took the baby into his arms, holding her with the same confident tenderness he'd shown with Thomas from the beginning. Hello, Grace, he murmured. I'm your papa. I've been waiting to meet you for a long time. Martha brought Thomas in to meet his sister, lifting the boy onto the bed beside Olivia. He regarded the tiny bundle in Preston's arms with solemn curiosity. Baby, Thomas said clearly, pointing at his sister. That's right, Preston confirmed, lowering Grace so Thomas could see her better. This is your sister, Grace. You'll need to help Papa take care of her and Mama. Thomas nodded as if he understood the responsibility perfectly, then leaned against Olivia with a contented sigh. As Martha discreetly left the room, Preston looked at his family, his wife, his son, his newborn daughter with a sense of completeness he had never imagined possible when he was a lone cowboy driving cattle across the plains. I love you, Olivia Dawson, he said softly. More than I have words to express. Olivia reached for his hand, her eyes shining with the same deep emotion. And I love you, Preston. Thank you for keeping us warm that night and every night since. Outside, snow fell gently on the Dawson ranch, but within its walls, the warmth of family and love kept the cold at bay, just as a cowboy's promise had done on a desperate winter night when a baby cried in the cold, and 2 lives were forever changed by a simple act of kindness. 5 years later, the Dawson Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the county. The main house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Grace had been joined by brothers Samuel and Joseph, making for a lively household filled with children's laughter and occasional chaos. Thomas, now 6 years old, was the spitting image of Preston in manner if not appearance, following his father everywhere and already showing aptitude for ranch work despite his young age. Grace, at 5, was a spirited girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's determined nature. Samuel, 3, and Joseph, just 1, were still too young for distinct personalities to emerge, but both showed signs of the Dawson stubbornness. On the anniversary of the day they had met, Preston and Olivia made it a tradition to visit the old stagecoach station, now renovated as a way station for the increasing traffic between settlements. This particular year, they brought all 4 children, wanting them to understand the story of their family's beginning. This is where Papa saved me and Thomas, Olivia explained to Grace and Samuel as they explored the small building. Joseph remained in Preston's arms, eyeing the surroundings with the solemn curiosity that characterized all his observations. Was it very cold, Mama? Grace asked, her imagination captured by the tale she'd heard many times. Colder than you can imagine, Olivia confirmed. Thomas was just a tiny baby, smaller than Joseph is now, and we had nowhere to go. Thomas, who had been examining the stove in the corner, turned to Preston. "And then you came and said, 'Give him here, I'll keep him warm,'" he recited, having memorized this crucial part of the family story. Preston smiled, ruffling Thomas's hair affectionately. "That's right, best decision I ever made." "Because otherwise we wouldn't be a family," Grace added with the certainty of a child who knows the ending to her favorite story. "Exactly," Olivia agreed, sharing a loving look with Preston across the room. As they prepared to leave, Preston pulled Olivia aside while the children gathered their things. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a gold locket on a delicate chain. "Preston, it's beautiful," Olivia breathed, touching the locket gently. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny painting of the stage coach station on one side and an inscription on the other. "Where our journey began. P&O 1876. Happy anniversary, my love," Preston said softly, fastening the necklace around her neck. Olivia touched the locket where it rested against her collarbone. "It's perfect, thank you." She reached up to kiss him, still feeling the same flutter in her stomach that his touch had always provoked. "Mama and Papa are kissing again," Thomas announced loudly to his siblings, his tone suggesting this was a common and slightly embarrassing occurrence. Preston laughed, sweeping Joseph up onto his shoulders. "That's right, son, and I plan to keep kissing your mother for at least another 50 years. "At least," Olivia agreed with a smile, taking Grace's and Samuel's hands as they stepped back into the winter sunshine, leaving the stage coach station behind but carrying its legacy of love and family with them. A legacy born on a cold night when a baby cried and a cowboy offered warmth that would last a lifetime.